Hi everybody, welcome to our webcast on ensuring success with your CCMS. My name is Sarah O'Keefe. I'll be hosting, and we're delighted to have Chip Gettinger with us today, who you just heard. A couple of quick things on the event structure before I hand it over to Chip. There are a whole bunch of you on this call and you're all muted. We do, however, want to hear from you, so please take just a second to find the questions area, which if you responded to my question about audio, you've already found it, and thank you for that. That is where we would ask you to go ahead and put any questions or comments or additional information, whatever you want in there. We will have some Q&A time at the end, and we may also have some time to answer questions as we're going through the event. We are recording this webcast. There's always the #1 question, so you'll receive an email with the recording link typically about a day after we get the webcast done. Now let me introduce our guest. Chip Gettinger is here. Chip is the VP of XML Solutions for SDL's Content Management Technologies Division. This group, as you may know, includes TriSoft, which has now been rebranded to Live Content, I believe, or Live Content Architect.
Yep.
Yep, I've known Chip for years. We've been friends for years and years. He's one of the very few people that I rely on for really good advice around XML and CMS issues. And so with that, I believe I will hand it off to Chip.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for that introduction, and welcome everybody. It's great to see everyone joining today. I know there's still a few folks joining in. When Sarah and I talked about doing this webinar a few months ago, I realized over the years that there's a number of things that I've seen that work and don't work, and also a number of things that really best practices that I've seen many of our customers adopt with their CCMS. There's also some new methodologies that are emerging. Sarah and I both attended Ann Rockley's Intelligent Content Conference last week, which I want to talk about during this webinar. Very, very exciting stuff and new approaches and methodologies. And it's like, what's working, what's not working out there? What do we need to do, and what do you need to be thinking about next? And also, as Sarah said, we'll have a Q&A at the end. And as she also mentioned, we'd love to have questions during my session. So happy for folks to pop in the question area down in the panel. So we're going to do a poll here to get started. So Sarah, go ahead and fire up poll #1, please. And we're really interested in, what level of experience does the audience have, with this particular and component content management. So, how many of you are using it day to day, for your work? How many of you are just in the process of deploying it? And, just learning and interested. And I see that we've got the poll results here. Looks like almost 38% of you are just learning. 15% have no experience or in the process of deploying, and 8% use it every day. So it looks, roughly a little over half of you are either working in a CCMS or, are interested. So that's good to know. So any thoughts on that, Sarah?
Well, I guess my question, we get so embroiled in this and when we're dealing with customers every day that are in the process or already have a CMS, is this about what you expect to see from sort of the general audience, or are there any numbers here that jump out at you?
I'm excited that there's such a high level of just learning. What that's telling me, Sarah, is that we're starting to see a new wave of additional users come into the DITA community, the CCMS community. You and I have been doing this for many years. And a trend that I've spotted in the last 2 years is just a new wave of companies, organizations adopting. So I see this as a very good trend.
Okay. I will hide that and let you carry on.
Sounds good. So I again wanted to kind of formulate some of my ideas and opinions that I've seen over the times that I think really help when you're starting to work in your organization. So I think for many of you that are either just starting to adopt or continuing to expand, it's really critical to know your company's business drivers. And guess what? They're going to shift over time. It's very relevant for, especially if you're based in the U.S. companies. There's a lot of pressures going on within organizations. The big trend in the last few years has been around global expansion into new markets. And what, of course, does that mean for us as technical communicators are more languages, perhaps time to market challenges. I've seen a number of our customers move into China, other Asian countries. And the adoption, to get into those languages and so forth, there's a ramp-up time that's required. I think it's important for all of us to monitor fundamental shifts within your company. If you're a public company in the U.S., your company does what's called a 10K report, and there's a section in there that has forward-thinking prospects. Where's the company going? And it's amazing how, one or two of those could latch on into your adoption. Because, really what you need to think about is evolving your strategy ahead of the curve. I'm going to talk later about being more proactive instead of reactive. But I see a lot of organizations, sorry about that, I see a lot of organizations who are really ahead of the curve in their planning, anticipating what's going to happen next. For example, Agile development I'm going to talk about. A couple of Tech Hubs teams I know are now on the teams actually with their developer coworkers developing the storyboarding and so forth, and that's because of a lot of good planning they did. Which also really helps to keep yourself visible within your company. Some organizations do brown bag lunches or similar kind of events. Invite yourself to one of those. And you're not going to go and talk about the benefits of CCMS. You may throw a slide in or two or even a talk. I think talk about the business drivers that you see you're able to support within your company, the faster time to market, more product releases, those kinds of things in business terms really help. And finally, I think watch for expansion into other groups within your organization. A big trend I've seen in the last year to two has been moving into learning and training groups. As those of you that are DITA folks, there's a learning and training specialization that's included, which is fully supported in the systems that I work with. And I think the business adoption is there because learning and training groups tend to be profit centers. They tend to be revenue centers for companies. So especially if you have to do certification for any of your particular end users or deployers or partners or so forth, it makes a lot of sense for them to get into structured authoring in CCMS. Field service, product management are two new areas I'm seeing and emerging. Especially if you have a company that manufactures equipment and ships it to customers, and you have a field service organization, these folks have just a wealth of knowledge, skills, information that they probably have either on local notebooks or stashed away in some portal or somewhere it's hidden from everyone else. Imagine them getting in and being able to contribute content that's relevant to the larger audience of people. And maybe even other groups. I'm not even sure what other groups. The trend I saw at the conference last week were a lot of marketing people who really typically in branded content really getting interested in structured content and its benefits and so forth. So one of the things we did have sorry.
Oh, sure. Let me jump in. I did have an interesting and sort of preliminary question that we might want to address at this point, and that was, what is the difference between a CCMS and a CMS? Great question, Sarah. So, traditionally, CMSs have been around, oh gosh, good 15 so years. Content management systems tend to be either focused on documents or web pages or are very kind of document-centric content. So systems like SharePoint, Documentum, or very traditional CMSs. There are a number of them now today in the market that do web content management. Tridion, for example, is one from SDL, or Drupal, some of you may know. The difference is with a component content management is it's specifically tuned to manage topics or components of content. Again, for those familiar with DITA, these are DITA topics, DITA maps, and DITA references. So a CCMS out of the box
understands the links between those particular modules. And secondly, a CCMS also helps to manage the versioning of those objects over time. So imagine that you're working in more of a help-like system or so forth. A CCMS is fine-tuned to help you manage those changes over time. And then finally, I think the real benefit of CCMS is it provides out-of-the-box capabilities versus having to do it as an add-on or extensive configuration or programming on a traditional CMS. Great question. I did want to, bring up one other thing while I'm on this slide, is that customer experience is really critical in our industry now. It's been very important in the web world, and I'm going to again talk about this a little bit more later. But it's really important to continue to innovate about how you're presenting your content to your customers, because ultimately our customers are the folks that are going to be consuming and using this content, and if they do thumbs up or thumbs down or whatever they're going to do, that's really super critical. And I'm going to expand it out. Your customers could be, end user customers that purchase your software. They could be internal users. They could be OEM partners. It's a pretty broad range of ability to do and support. Probably the important thing is really don't lock yourself in, because the future just brings so many new possibilities. With the ability to publish out to different devices and so forth. So I think it's really important to think about that. Your content model then is going to continue to adapt, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we do that. So at SDL, we hosted a couple years ago. We were trying to assist our customers in understanding how do you kind of mature your content model over time. I think for many of you that adopted DITA, it's a very rich language for anywhere from markup to metadata and so forth. However, what happens is that as we start looking at things of optimizing the content for viewing, you really need to think about a phased approach. So this is a much larger webinar that I've done with my colleague Howard Schwartz here at SDL, but we talk about first about an awareness that there needs to be a new content model to handle in organizations. And this is where we see a lot of companies who are just examining DITA, for example, or they're looking at a CCMS and they're trying to understand, is this for me? And then structured is kind of the next phase where people adopt the structured authoring approach, so they get the benefits of validation and structure in the content and parsing it and so forth. They get the benefits of reuse, which I'm going to talk about quite a bit, workflow. But one of the things that Sarah and I chat about is many times when the structured phase is people adopt what their old model used to look like, some of the old tools, which tend to be print-centric. What's important is we're starting to see organizations now get into a collaborative phase. I'm working with a couple companies in Southern California who are collaborating with their field service engineers, that example I just mentioned. And the field service folks have so much wisdom and knowledge, but there's no way we would ever get them into structured authoring in some of the old methodologies. So there's some new approaches that you can do to get them into more being collaborative with the writers who are responsible, of course, for ultimately reviewing and working with that content. And then what we see then is that you can get into a transformative type phase where you really start to interact directly with your customers. I'm sure many of us all use either Facebook, LinkedIn, or Google+, or name your social media of choice. And this is really transformative as the way you can communicate and work with people. Well, guess what? That has huge impacts in our industry in technical communications. So imagine being able to engage with customers and get direct feedback, get comments, and so forth. And this is happening quite a bit with wikis and blogs and so forth. But the challenge is a lot of this content ends up in silos. So what we start looking at is how can we start engaging with with customers and so forth, so that they're able to contribute content that's useful, but of course needs to be reviewed and merged in and translated and so forth for other types of users and so forth. So the other big thing that we hear about CCMS, component content management, is content reuse. And Sarah was very helpful in kind of formulating some ideas here on this slide, so thank you, Sarah, when we did our practice a few weeks ago. You know, many organizations looking to adopt these tools need an ROI, return on investment. And the two biggest ROIs, one is around content reuse, and the second is typically around translation. A third I would even add in is even time to market, which we're not going to talk about today. But content reuse seems to be a very powerful feature that I see many organizations adopt. And to be honest, it's an area I see a lot of really nice innovation, especially with the CCMS. And how do you start, though? You know, do you dig right in and start doing content references or key refs and, you know, oh my gosh, you know, and to be honest, it takes a little bit of planning and work on this. So, you know, really what we like to think about is taking small, you know, steps and expand as your content level increases. So, you know, a first step might be, you know, very simple reuse, which is, again, a book paradigm, a front and back banner, glossary, copyrights, you know, things like that that are very reusable and very easy to manage across multiple deliverables. A next level of reuse might be topic reuse within maps for very common tasks. Many DITA topics are procedural in, you know, the task kind of topic types. And you know, you'll find that these topic can, with some, you know, editing and some cleanup, can be reused across your different product lines. You know, installation procedures, configurations, and so forth. I've seen a number of companies, you know, look at this at a topic level. In fact, I've had a couple customers that, once they started moving into structure and so forth, they're very successful in identifying these topics just by getting the content into topics instead of being more document-based and so forth. Then we can get into some more advanced kind of approaches. And I've seen some organizations do this earlier, it just depends on your content types, to really create libraries of notices, you know, cautions, warnings. These are very prevalent in content types that, you know, either have things like, you know, watch out for electrical challenges or other problems. It's very easy to store those in a library and reuse those as content references or conrefs within your content. And then finally, and this is probably one of my favorites, is to start conditionalizing the content. So the fact that you have a specific task for a configuration item, but you need to support Windows, Linux, and Macintosh platforms, you can start conditionalizing that content of what you would do for each platform. And you can even get into variables to manage things like product names and company names and so forth. This is important for if you are OEMing or reselling your products and rebranding it under different product names, which one of my customers does. And then ultimately you can get into things like conref ranges and keyrefs, more advanced kind of DITA capabilities to really take advantage of that reuse. And you know, this seems like basic 101 stuff, but consistency is critical for strong reuse. So, you know, one of the techniques I find with the CCMS, they all have search capabilities. So authors can get very creative and start searching for things that they think they might want to reuse. And really, you know, doing some coordination and planning is key for reuse. But the thing about it is I see many organizations are distributed. So if your colleagues are in India or Germany and you're in California or Massachusetts, wherever, you know, you may not have the day-to-day interactions. So you need to be able to have this consistency. And then finally, a couple thoughts is that, you know, aware use capability helps to determine impacts. I've been to some organizations who are afraid to reuse content because if I reuse, you know, Mary's topic, I have no way of controlling what changes she makes. So, you know, this is part of the planning phase, but, you know, you need to understand impacts and so forth on future updates. You know, for example, Microsoft just came out with Windows 8. Apple came out with some updates with OS 10. These are things that are going to impact us. And then finally, we even have to reuse. Maybe you're starting to do ebooks and so forth. A where use capability really helps you plan out that. And then finally, translation is one of the areas at the higher level of reuse that you have. You're reusing all the target languages that you're developing under the hood as well. So if I reuse a topic in English, I've got the Chinese, Japanese, French, German, all being reused across as well. So Sarah, we have another polling question here. Interested in, so it was good to know that, again, many of you are inside of a CCMS. What kind of level of content reuse has your company achieved to date? We're really interested. I think if any of you get anywhere 20% and above, that's really great. If you're doing more than that, that's fantastic. If you're doing less than that, there's probably some things you could do to help improve that. And a lot of this has to do with the level of information that you started to identify and start to move into a CCMS. So for example, you may be just starting out and have a couple of documents in your CCMS. When you get to 10 or 20 or 30 or more, you may have quite a bit of content for potential reuse.
And Chip, in your experience, when you just look at a set of, typical, of course there's no typical, right? But if you look at TechCom docs just in general, what kind of reuse do you expect to see, really without trying very hard? I mean, how much is there that people should be able to reuse in general?
Sarah, it's a great question. I think the low-hanging fruit typically is topic kind of level reuse. The things like introduction sections, tasks that are based. It's funny how procedural type tasks tend to be very quick finds for reuse. I think the second level of reuse that I typically find is in the caution and warning statements. It tends to be more for more techie kind of companies, but typically, those, it's funny, I'll get some, for example, I have a workshop today I'm leading with a customer, and I found, 10 levels content, I sent 10 different warning statements that said the same thing, and they had written them 10 times. I was able to, bring it down to one reuse.
Right, so let's take a look at the results here. And I think just to point out that reuse is a really powerful way of cutting the overall cost of your content development.
It definitely is, Sarah. And it's something that I think, we would encourage every organization to look at your reuse strategy and as I said earlier, continue to innovate around it. One last thought I have is that your authors a lot of times have much to contribute as you're using the system. For those of you that are information architects, content architects out there, engage with your authors, the people creating the content, see what kind of innovation they may find to help kind of increase the amount of reuse and so forth.
Yeah, so here are the results. What's your take on this?
My take on it is there's still some work to be done out there. I think, we've got, 35% of the people have more than 20% reuse, which is a good, 20% is a good marker. That's kind of a good place to be. I think perhaps we have, 48 and 13% of the folks are, let's say, just getting going. Perhaps they want to go back and look for some low-hanging fruit to see if they can hit that 20% mark in the next, let's say next 6 to 12 months.
Okay. I will hide that for you.
Thanks. So the other thing that I see quite frequently is what I'll think of as complex and continuous product releases. Going back to the challenges we have strategically within your company, Agile development is just a lovely thing or a hateful thing, and that's a strong word to use to quote somebody famous, but it's real, and I really have seen that shift from waterfall development into agile development across industries. It's not unique just to software. One of our customers actually manufactures water testing equipment and purification, and they've gone agile. And what does this mean? You know, it really, to us, it means faster release cycles and really iterative and incremental development. So, you know, a CCMS is so perfectly matched to help support these kind of iterative type, you know, development cycles. Here at SDL, we do about, I think, 6-week cycles, if I remember. Now, we don't release every 6 weeks. We may fold those into multiple releases. But I think that what's really important is that you're starting to see concurrent development happen. So my favorite, one of my customers showed me this great chart of the overlapping releases and the hot fixes and patches required to go back, which were even more important. And I think, you know, I cannot imagine managing these things without a CCMS because you have so many variations. You have differences that you're trying to manage over time. And the thing about this is that some of this is planned and some of it is not planned. I think many times there's, you know, hot fixes or patches require you to go back to make changes to a release that may have come out last year while still working and continuing on with the release coming out in June. So, you know, what really helps manage this is version management within a CCMS. And again, component content management has very fine-tuned versioning. And in techie terms, I'm able to go in and say, let's say within this DITA map I have 250 topics. I could version just 10 of those topics or even branch them for hotfix, while I'm still working on 20 new versions in other topics for my June delivery. And you know, you really need to think about a CCMS to manage those kind of variations, and also things that start rolling up into newer releases. So my favorite is, okay, that hot fix was unique to that hot fix only. Oh, but the second item here needs to roll up into the June release. So I'm going to talk about metadata in a little bit, is how do you really start to mix and match to meet your product deliveries? I think, you know, it's really important to think about these complex releases, no matter, you know, how you know, what kind of products you have and so forth. And I once had a friend talk about a universal content design that really looked at, you know, how am I going to overall manage this? And I think, you know, change management is probably one of the most important things to think about as you're going through and looking at these product release cycles. One last thought is that successful companies with their CCMS become part of those agile teams. I mentioned our customer earlier, but you know, if you start becoming, you know, again, this is part of the being really active type, you know, and you're within your company, you'll find yourselves involved much earlier in the product development cycle, so you can start planning some of these updates instead of being reactive to changes that are kind of falling down and falling out based on product updates and so forth. So, workflow. Workflow is one of my favorite subjects to see a lot of anxiety get built around. And I apologize, I don't mean to be so blunt about it, but it does create anxiety within organizations, I think within groups. It also depends on the management style within a company. And you know, workflow is a really critical component to adopting a CCMS. But it's not going to fix everything. You know, it's not this kind of magic wand that's just going to kind of magically make everything get ready in time for the product release. It's still very much important around collaboration, you know, and collaborating as a team. Because, you know, it kind of takes a village here, which is another point of term here, where it takes several authors and reviewers to support a deliverable. And I think what's really important is to think about your workflow as collaboration, where you've got many different sources of authors, reviewers, writing and reviewing content, and you need to have a trust. You need to have a trust that it's going to work, it's going to follow the procedures. And probably the largest challenge is around change management and ensuring that people understand this shift from document-based workflows to more component or topic-based workflows. Because eventually, if you start looking at this, and I will say different CMSs handle this slightly differently, but it suddenly becomes more important about the status of individual components. So the topic maps, graphic images, they all have their own lifespan. They all have their own kind of cycle they're going to go through before they're actually finalized and approved for publishing. And really you need to ask yourself is, how does this roll up into a deliverable? And coordination and tracking to meet deadlines. So again, going back to that 250 topic example I said earlier, and you're changing 20 or 30 of them, you're not going to worry about 210 of them or 230 of them. You're going to worry about the ones that are getting updated and so forth. And metadata is really important to tracking these processes. Providing statistics, status reports, and so forth. I've got some screen captures here in a minute. And metadata is another one of those kind of mystery, I don't want to say mystery, but it's a thing that evolves over time. But the important thing is that it provides feedback about how are you doing in making your timelines, making your deliverables, and so forth. And then the CCMS workflow can give you kind of a screen, kind of a snapshot of where you are and over time. And then finally, how close are you to meeting the end goal of your actually delivery of your product and so forth. So this is one particular screen capture in our system that talks kind of readiness. And managers love things like diagrams here, like I can see there's a lot of green and a little bit of red and yellow. That's good. If it were different, very quickly I would see that if it were a lot of red, I'd be saying, uh-oh, what's going on here? And also, readiness indicators. Here we are at almost 100% in releasing our topics and so forth. I think it's also important to think about different views of this content. So, this top part might be the English only, but the bottom part could also, how are we doing with translation and so forth. Because of that concurrency I talked about earlier, many of our customers are doing concurrent translations while they're authoring the English, and they'll release them. They'll get them translated while other topics are being authored. So this is very concurrent processing that can go on to help meet those time-to-market delivery problems. So customer experience, I mentioned it earlier. I think it's the most critical item facing us as we move forward in our architecture decisions, our content delivery decisions. Customer experience is so critical. And I think for a lot of us, it's how much do we know about our customers? How do they use the content that you're putting out? Is it a PDF on a website? Is it a printed book? Is it a help file system? Are your help file systems linked? How do they search? How do they index these types of things? Do you know what's good, bad, or frustrating about your content that you're putting out to your customers? And probably the most critical part, and these are the things that marketing folks really like to understand, is what is your customer's point of view? What are they trying to do with your content? I had one customer who found out a vast majority of their users, their customers, were folks out in cages in these big hosting centers, crawling around, working on servers, looking up online docs on their handheld iPhones and Androids. Because these users, these customers were so mobile, they didn't work tethered to computers at their desk and so forth, and they were finding that their online doc experience was poor because the navigation was so difficult for them on a small screen. So it's really up to us to look at creating and delivering compelling content. How are we going to engage with the customer? What's really kind of nice is if Some of you may have the privilege of working and understanding your customers. If you don't, work with your marketing group. They should have some statistics, or they can help collect information for you. Again, any moderate-sized company will do either annual surveys or polls of their customers. See if you could get 3 or 4 questions added in about help systems or the documentation that you provide to your products. And they can collect some information for you. One of the exciting parts of our customers, one of my customers told me, is they got to attend their company's user conference. And they set up a little booth to actually interview customers, and they actually videoed them. And they were no more than 3 or 5 minute type interviews, 4 or 5 questions, to be able to find out how do you use it, what do you like about it, what don't you like about it, and what would you like to see in the future. Your company may have a forum as well. At SDL, we use LinkedIn a lot for areas. You'd be interested to find information there as well. Another interesting thing is measurable incremental content improvements get noticed. I was at an executive meeting with a customer yesterday, and the manager of the Tech Pubs group was there, and her manager said, yeah, we increased our customer stat. We increased it 1% last year. He was very proud of that. So, we don't have to go for the huge increases. Incremental improvements get noticed. A big area I would encourage you to look at are things like search engine optimization. If you're working in DITA and you're doing things like index terms and so forth, there's a number of really good approaches out there that I know Sarah can really help promote, other folks in the industry. The ultimate goal is to really help provide context for your customer and ultimately kind of personalize that experience for their kind of deliverables. So just some other facts about continuing that engagement with your customer. We all know that retention is important, and it's much more cost-effective than acquisition. It's 6 to 7 times more costly to acquire new customers than retain an existing one. There's some other facts here about, how to keep customers engaged. I had another slide I don't think I have in here that also talks about bad news travels fast. So if your customer has a bad experience, either not solving their question or problem, or worse, they'll broadcast it out to other people with or without you knowing that. So the key really is to think about multi-channel output, is to think about the experience a user is going to have and how that experience is going to interact and work with particular customers. And I'll be honest, I'm not an expert in this area, but what I see is that the experience, and think about some of our own personal uses. I mean, I'm sitting here on my PC doing this webinar, and I've got an iPad and an iPhone as well. I don't expect the same experience, perhaps, across these devices, but perhaps I expect consistency. So if I'm on a small screen device, I want to have some consistency with the information, but perhaps it's much smaller scale than I'm seeing on a much larger screen. So you really need to think about this multi-channel approach to try and get out of just a print-centric approach. And then finally, there's nothing worse than trying to read a PDF file on your small Android or iPhone. I mean, I can do it. I think we all can do it, but the user experience really has trouble trying to manage that and work with it. So, we really start then thinking about the journey of your customer. And when I think about customer experience, I think that initially we're involved in engagement and learning with our customers, with our products, with our help system, with our user guides, with our reference manuals. These are very much about engaging and learning that particular, the products that you have or so forth. What gets really fascinating is that as you start solving problems, as your customers start to solve problems, there's a real strong ability to move into endorsement. So people can endorse content, they can actually solve things, they can contribute to it, and in the thumbs up kind of scenario or like or so forth becomes very important for your content you're engaging with customers. So here's some ways to engage and measure some of the customer engagement. Search, visiting websites are very interesting, especially if you've got either HTML help. This happens to come from our SDL Live content application as part of our analytics. But similar kinds of tools could really give you a quick overview of how customers are engaging and working with your content and how long they're looking at your content. We worry a lot about how people are finding the content ultimately they're reading it. So they may land on one topic, click on a related link. How many topics do they have to click through before they actually, read something for a minute or two? Could we improve our architecture to say instead of having to go through 5 or 6 topics to find their interest, could we get it in 1 or 2? So kind of getting towards the end here, my last slide, thinking about trends and predictions. I think the impact of social networks is broad and deep. And, again, I mentioned earlier, many of us, I'm sure, use Facebook, LinkedIn. There are a number of private social networks that companies set up as well. At SDL we use Salesforce.com and Chatter, and there's a bunch of other types of ways that you can communicate. So social networking has really expanded beyond just the kind of personal, friends and family and colleagues. It's also very important within business. So what this means is that suddenly you can be on a social network with those contributors, those field service engineers in my earlier example, or other SMEs, contributors in your company that may have knowledge that could be very useful to your customers. So suddenly there's tools that are out there that you could help engage, information from those folks. How we're going to get that into structured content is another conversation. But I think the first thing is just to recognize that this impact of social networking is very strong and deep within companies across different markets and so forth. I think I've also talked about the multiple devices are now expected by your customers. I think that's pretty common today. And the other challenge is these devices are changing. At the conference, at Intelligent Content Conference last week, at Sarah and I attended, there was a lot of discussion around ebooks, which, very popular format, everything from, National Geographic to New York Times, which is more kind of information or news-based. But how do we, start, presenting product content more relative to our deliveries and so forth? And I think that a majority of your customers are going to expect being able to access this information, this content, on various devices. I think probably, one other thing that is pushing this along is web convergence. And what I mean by web convergence is kind of more the traditional branded content, web content that may be developed in your company. We have several customers who have product data sheets that are created in their marketing group, and a lot of that content happens to correlate with TechPub's content or information that may be more traditional in user guides and help systems. And in old methods, this information could get out of sync. So your customers find this content no matter who's writing it in your company. So you better start aligning it so that there's some consistency between the various ways that your customers may be finding your content. Earlier I talked about that circle, that customer engagement. We find that a number of your customers are looking at product-based content to help systems to make purchase decisions. So these are trends that are very important to understand, that suddenly it's a wider audience of people that may be reading and using your content. And I think the other thing that's important about web convergence are some of the trends that are going on in social media. I mentioned earlier about tracking, what's the chatter going on around the community, around your products and so forth. There's a lot of really kind of cool tools to measure social noise about your products in the community, and the web world brings a lot of these, along with probably more things like video. I'm seeing, and I'm skipping here ahead real quick because I think video is gaining importance. Several of our customers do 3 to 5 minute videos on procedural type things, and they'll mix that in with their kind of task topics and so forth. And the nice thing about videos is that they're very easy to produce if you kind of follow some guidelines. In fact, one of our customers came up with some scenarios. They'll do a quick and dirty video just to show somebody how to get a task completed, and that might only be 2 to 3 minutes, very low cost kind of hosting. A second level of video might be a little bit more quality, a little bit more thought. Maybe you're focused on a solution, not just a task and so forth, and that takes a little bit more planning. And then a third type of video might be, you have a talking head of some expert in your company that talks to a particular solution along with the task and so forth, and those rarely go more than 5 minutes and so forth. But how you go about producing and maintaining those really do impact how the content you're creating. So I want to go back up to wikis and community-based authoring. There's a number of tools that can contribute content. I still worry about how that content, though, gets trapped in silos. If companies aren't careful, they'll end up locking those into particular areas of silos. So wikis are really useful and community-based if you have a way of linking them back into source content, or at least providing ways for other people in the company to see what's going on, to be able to have their updates and so forth. Another big trend I see is around partnerships and alliances. I can't tell you how many customers tell me that part of their product was split off. They still own the product, but they split that product off, and it's OEM now to another company. And 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when they wrote their DITA topics, they never thought that would happen. But they always say, thank goodness that we kind of planned ahead and we were able to break off different components. So be aware of different partnerships and alliances within your company. I know I'm right here in Silicon Valley. There's several companies that have formed alliances, and the user experience for that product, even though it's 3 different product companies, that user experience needs to be consistent across what the customer's doing around their solutions and so forth. And this really gets into kind of some final points about rich, personalized customer delivery just in time. I'm a big proponent in this kind of just-in-time delivery, and the techie in me says that, why don't we just push all our content out to a site that then can, on the fly, filter that content pertinent for a customer, kind of on the fly, apply the conditions, the variables, and so forth. And if you look at this, this really helps to improve your customer experience by really having context for that delivery and so forth. So providing that ability, downstream, or earlier in your process, instead of saying, I'm going to flatten out all my delivery into HTML or PDFs or so forth, we just publish out all that rich information that you've put into your DITA content from your CCMS. We publish that out to a delivery platform that has the ability to, on the fly, filter that and really provide that just-in-time quality delivery for a particular customer. Well, Sarah, I think we're about done here. I just, wanted to ask a few questions and see what's going on, but, how do people deliver compelling content and measure the engagement and so forth? So,
all right. Well, thank you, Chip. I've got some really interesting questions here, including probably one that needs to come with a beverage warning. One of the people on the call would like to know how much raw stubbornness, that is inertia unrelated to any process or objective imperatives, do you run into with your clients?
How much raw what now?
Stubbornness.
From them, it's less than you would think. When I got into this about 8, 9 years ago, before I was doing SGML, there was a lot of stubbornness. A lot of people worried about moving into this kind of iterative type approaches. I would say most of the stubbornness now comes from people who invested in CCMSs maybe 8, 10 years ago in early kind of content models. I'm seeing a fair amount of stubbornness moving into more modern content models. They still think very print-centric, but they're still being pushed by their management to do these online deliveries, these e-books, or whatever kind of deliverables are, and they're holding on to the tools that got developed in 1999 or 2000. So that's probably the one area of stubbornness. I think a second quick part is from a management standpoint, it's going back to the business values that you bring into a particular manager, director, or VP. The VPs will understand time to market. They'll understand, they won't understand cost savings. They'll want to know about revenue opportunities. You'll get their interest, and the stubbornness seems to drop down.
Yeah, I would just add to that that the major issue that we see, in addition to just general change resistance, is people saying that their PDFs need to look a specific and exact way, and that specific and exact way, at least 9 times out of 10, is incredibly unattractive. So they're telling us, make it look exactly like this, and we're looking at it thinking, but why? This is terrible.
Because someone in 1999 decided that was the look and feel. Yeah.
And that was the look and feel. What do you feel is the biggest mistake that people make? I mean, what is the one thing that you just really wish they wouldn't do?
You're going to love me for this, Sarah, but I think the number one mistake is people spend too much time thinking and planning without doing things. I'm a big proponent in hands-on time and working with systems. I think whiteboard timing is really critical and important, and project planning is really important, but you can't spend too much time in there. I think the biggest thing you can do is get in, build some use cases, and stay very focused when you start out. Don't try to overplan it, because you'll learn from your experiences. And I think, Sarah, you offer some really good coaching to a lot of users and so forth. But it's kind of like, just jump in and start using it, and then modify your ideas as your users experience it. To that point, probably work with a very core team of people. You may work with 4, 6, 8, 10 people in your company, depending on your size, and build from those ideas as you start expanding out before you go into the very large systems.
Okay, and there's a question here about workflow and context, that it can be difficult to assess a sort of disembodied fragment, and how do you address that in a workflow, this issue that the reviewer doesn't get necessarily to get context for that fragment, or do they?
Yeah, I think that's going to vary by vendor. At STL we've come out with a new STL Live Content release where we do provide context for the user in a browser to see that topic that they're reviewing in context of the other topics. And we can actually provide the ability for them to see it all unfiltered. I mean, seeing all the conditions turned on so they can see Mac and Windows and so forth in one topic, or they can filter it dynamically in the browser. So we kind of thought a lot about that, and I think it's really going to be, some kind of sophisticated browser-based, process to go in and put, that display. Secondly, real quickly, you can also create a PDF that includes all the context as well. Maybe it's not just topic review. I've seen moderate success with, topic-only review. I think it's also going to depend how independent your topics are, and I know, Sarah, that's probably something maybe you have some thoughts too on.
Well, I hear that a lot. I hear a lot of concern about disembodied context, but at the same time, for example, you talk about warnings and cautions, right? I mean, we really just need to align those, get them right once, and call it a day. And the caution about, you know, hydraulic fluid should always be the same, so there's not as much of a concern about context there. I would also say that if you write carefully, then context isn't, and this gets into some localization issues too, but when you say things like, you know, this is important because something, well, this what? It relies on the previous sentence, you need that context. So if you really write modular documentation carefully, you can not eliminate but minimize some of the context issues you know, that you're dealing with. Comment here from, actually a couple of comments here. One is a tip is to rely on standards when it comes to what content is required and to the structure of the content, which I think we would both agree with. And I think your don't overplan is a soundbite that a couple of people at least are taking to heart. Are there any sort of closing thoughts that you want to leave people with? You know, you've been around this block a few times.
Yeah, I personally want to just thank so many people out there that have been courageous at making change happen within their companies. I want to encourage each and every one of you to make change happen in your company. I've seen many users or customers over the year get promoted within their company, get new jobs. I've known a couple people get stock grants and options because of the work that they did in this, you know, adopting component content management, moving into this. So there are rewards to happen within your organization. You know, make the change management happen. You know, do your planning, do your homework, be social about it. The rewards are there within your company, and you know, like a lot of people I saw last week, Sarah. You know, probably half of them have all gotten promoted over the last 2-3 years for their dedication and skills.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that really was an excellent event, and I think you've got a couple of others coming up that maybe you wanted to mention.
Yeah, we have our STL Innovate conference in San Jose. It's going to be June 13th and 14th. That's our and it's open to the community, and you can go to our website for more information. It's partly our user conference, technology partners will be there. It's quite an exciting event. It's a no-cost event. For those of you in the Silicon Valley area, or if you want to fly in, please go ahead and register. And secondly, Howard Schwartz and I from SDL will be presenting at the CMS DITA North America Conference in April in Providence, Joan Hackos' conference. And we're going to be talking a lot about customer experience in more detail. And Howard has actually done a lot of the research behind that, and we'll be presenting that in April.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And what I want to do at this point is thank you all for coming. Chip, thank you for putting in all this work and sort of, you know, putting together your hard-won experience.
Oh, my pleasure.
Let's see. Yeah, thank you. We've got a couple of other events coming up in March, so check our events page on scriptorium.com. And if you have any other questions, the recording will be out in a day or so, and certainly you can email either one of us if you have any additional questions. Thank you all. Thank you, Chip, and we will see you on the next one.